All right, we are going to get started, and I have a feeling we'll have a few people trickle in because the link was screwed up on my end. But so if you can have your video on, have it on because it makes it a little bit more like an actual class. But it's completely up to you. So I hope everyone is doing well. I know that there's a few students who have been out sick as well. So the plan is we are on Zoom today. I'm not allowed back on campus till next week. So we were on Zoom on Friday as well, and which should be fine. And then next week, we're going to start preparing for the debates. I'm going to go through a few things, and then I'm going to try to share the slides so we can actually work through the content for today. Before we get into that, does anyone have any questions? Is there anything that I can clarify about assignments, where the class is going, any of that type of stuff? And you don't even need to raise your hand, like just unmute yourself and ask.
I wanted to ask because like the assignments are kind of like pushed like front, I guess. I don't know how to explain it, but like you said you want us to be ready for the politicians.
Yeah, so I'll explain when we get to that today. So there are some in-class assignments that you've been doing. And I'll clarify that in a little bit just to make sure everyone knows. And because there's been things have been screwed up by me having COVID, I'm taking late work for obviously all of this week and some of next week. So you don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll make sure to clarify that. Any other questions about stuff?
Are we turning in this politician thing that we were supposed to have for today?
Yeah, later at the end, the last thing we'll do today, as long as we get through it all, I'll have you take your example and connect it to the stuff we talk about in class. Okay, other questions? All right, cool. Here's the main thing that I want to tell you. One, as I keep reminding you, don't forget about the 1 minute recap. If any of you want to go on Friday would be a good day to do it. You could do it for either the last class we had or for this class. I won't do any of them today, just for the sake of time. And then show and tell, same thing. If anyone wants to do a show and tell, send me an email. You could go on Friday. Next week, Monday, Wednesday are really good days for show and tell because we're doing group work. The days are really flexible. I don't have anything planned other than helping you prepare for the debates. That's the plan for next week. You already know your groups. You don't have to start preparing yet, but the question you are going to be researching and answering next week for the first debate is basically, what obligations do sports fans have? So what that means is, should sports fans pay attention to the political use and significance of sport? Should you pay attention to things like how sports leagues have handled COVID, which I had to do a little bit of research for the in-class writing on Monday? Should you pay attention to things like athletes' pay and how many rights they have or their ability to negotiate? Should you pay attention to the way that sports are used for nationalism? What happens when we know that there's human rights or labor rights violations? What if the owner of the team is a bad person? And then we're going to talk about this idea of sports washing. So I'm going to divide up the teams, and one team will argue that you actually do have an obligation as a fan. The other team is going to argue you don't really have an obligation as a fan. You can just enjoy it. And so you have to justify why that is. So that's going to be the theme for the debate. You can start thinking about it already if you want. You don't really have to. On Friday, I'll remind you again. And then Monday, you get to meet with your teams, start to talk about how you want to divide up the work, how you want to divide up readings. And then you got Monday and Wednesday to prepare, and then the debate's on Friday. So all of next week is for the debate, and we do that for all three debates. I always give you time to prepare. Any questions about that? And my plan on Friday is I'll actually email out the debate questions so it's formal, so you can start thinking about it for Monday. Okay, cool. I'm trying to think. And then I think I already put the debate groups on Brightspace. I'll double check that I did that. So you'll have all the things that you need to do for that. All right, for next time, for Friday, what I want you to do is two things. First, I have a podcast, 30 minutes long to listen to. So take notes if you want to while you listen to the podcast. The main thing is just that you listen to it. So if you want to do it while you're walking or doing dishes or commuting, any of those things are fine. So make sure to listen to the podcast. I will send out the link next time. It's on this idea of sports washing. And then the other thing that I want you to do is find an article on the Live Golf Series. So it's LIV Golf Series. I will send that out to you, a reminder. But this is a Saudi Arabian finance golf league that started a year and a half ago, and there was a lot of controversy with political implications. So I'm just going to have you find one article, do the tiny bit of research, and I'm curious what article you end up finding. So you don't have to do a write-up before class. Just find an article, and then in class, I'll have you do an in-class writing related to it. So that's the plan for Friday. Find an article related to the Live Golf League, skim it over, and then also listen to a podcast, and I will send out the link. All right, I'm going to start sharing the slides. Give me feedback on whether you can actually see them when I share these. I want to make sure that you're able to properly see what I'm seeing. Someone unmute themselves and tell me if you can see that.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you, whoever said that. All right, so here's the plan. We're going to talk about this idea of politics and the sacred divide. This is going to be mostly lecture. I'm going to have you just unmute yourself once in a while to help me out, but I'm mostly just going to lecture and go through this just to make sure we understand it, and it's pretty straightforward. I just want to also finish up briefly what we talked about last time because it relates to what we're doing today. Last time we were talking about the position of soccer in society, the role that it plays, the sports space that it occupies, the meaning that we attach to this thing, why it had the ability to gain popularity. And so we talked about its origins, the struggle throughout the 1900s, the beginning of soccer being able to find a success, it occupying a very particular location, right? So growing with suburbanization, there being a new sport space that existed, this kind of middle class sport. We saw the popularity among girls. We saw the popularity among women moving into the college level. We saw the popularity at the college level for men. But basically, soccer struggled in going pro, right? We weren't able to see that ability to enter or expand beyond that limited sports space, right? So the question I'm wondering, and you can help me with this, do you think soccer has managed to expand beyond that? Or do we still have those same type of associations? Is it still a sport that's associated more with either A, immigrant populations coming to the United States and keeping this cultural tradition, or B, do we still see it as this combination where it's that first group, and the second group being people coming out of that more suburban landscape, very popular among kids, but as they get older, kind of transitioning into other sports? I mean, I'm just curious, how do you see soccer? Feel free, don't feel like you have to raise your hand. It's easier for you just to jump in. Someone unmute and let me know. Do you think you still have the same do we still have the same associations with soccer? When we think of soccer fandom or participation, like where do we imagine it, right? Where is it actually popular?
I think it's definitely popular among like young kids, and I think it's definitely more of a sport that's like acceptable, I think, for women. I think I know that like most of the people that I know that play soccer are women.
Yeah, it's the most popular by far. It's the most popular collegiate sport for women. Do you think it still exists in that? So Brooke's kind of saying it still exists a little bit in that narrow space. I mean, the World Cup is one of the most watched events. It's the most watched event globally. In the United States, it's still popular. Do you think it's expanded beyond that same sports space, that same cultural and geographic space? Brooke's basically saying, yes, it's stuck. No, it hasn't expanded. It's still stuck in the same kind of niche. What do other people think?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I think that if you look solely in the American leagues, I would agree. I think
Yeah.
that if you start to look towards more the European leagues, especially in America too, those are more popularly viewed. I've been playing and coaching soccer for a long time, so I don't know if my perspective on it is a little skewed, but there's definitely a lot more following, even in America, if you look towards more international leagues.
Yeah, and it's interesting. That's a really good point. It's interesting with the fandom, right? So in most cases, when you have American fans of a sport, they focus more on the American version of the sport. Soccer would be the exception. Maybe we'd see something like F1. Are there other sports like that where the American fans may pay more attention to the international rather than domestic league? Can we think of any other? Like I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of one. The other thing is this is a useful analytic tool, right? We can ask, why is it that sport fails to push beyond? What are the steps that a league has to do to try to have financial success? And then also, how can that explain the success? As we talked about briefly last time, the women's soccer team, the American women have been one of the most dominant global powers in the last 30 years in soccer. Right? Why is that? Well, it occupies a different sports space. That's a really easy way to answer, but it has a lot of value. You could also think about how this gets politicized, because a big portion of this class, the foundation of this class is thinking about the relationship between sports and politics. Because of the sports space it occupies, the sport itself, every sport that we see, occupies not just a cultural niche, but in some ways overlaps with a political viewpoint. So with soccer, there still remains a critique. Every time the World Cup comes around, you're going to see some conservative talking head offer a critique of it. I don't know if it's always believed by the people offering the critique, but we can see it being offered. So for example, you have someone like Ann Coulter, who's a conservative spokesperson who's very popular. She had, submitting a few people to class. She has a very popular show. She was on Fox. She's been on various platforms, but she's very critical of soccer. Every time the World Cup comes around, she talks about it being a sign of the nation's moral decay. She explains that it is something that she views as a more feminine sport, and she offers this critique. Now, it's not based on the sport itself, right? Because we can look at the sports played around the world. Around the world, it's not viewed as an upper class, middle class, or suburban sport, but it still holds that place in our cultural imaginary. And I'll share this article that Ann Coulter wrote. It's almost a parody, and it's hard to know if she actually believes the stuff she's saying, but it still offers this critique of the place that of what she thinks soccer represents. All right, next thing. For the in-class writing that I had you do on Monday, what you had to do was do a little research about how any sport, any league that you chose handled COVID. What did they choose to do when COVID hit, right? Some leagues chose to shut down completely and didn't return for 2 years. Some leagues continued forward without really doing anything. Some took time off and returned in a bubble, as in the case of the NBA or the WNBA. So what I wanted you to do was research one league and then tell me what you thought it did well or what you thought it did not do well. I'm not going to discuss that today because it's a little harder via Zoom, but hold on to that information because that's going to be useful when you start preparing for the debate with your group. That should be part of the answer when you think about what ethical obligations a fan has, right? Should we pay attention? Should we be supporting a league more or less based on how they handle things like COVID? It's also a really good example of both. Actually, someone help me out. What are the two main kind of models for understanding sport that we've talked about so far? One we were just talking about, and then the other was through Clifford Geertz. What are the two approaches? Just unmute yourself and say one of them.
Dramaturgical.
Okay, first one's dramaturgical. And what's the second one?
Deep
Thanks
play.
for volunteering, Alex. Oh yeah, so sorry, Odessa, what'd you say?
I said deep play.
Oh yeah, it's deep play and dramaturgical overlap. So that's kind of the same. That's coming from Geertz. And what's the one we just talked about with soccer? What's the thing that a sport it needs to be able to grow? It occupies a certain thing. What do we call that?
It fills a space.
Yeah, sport space, right? So there's two approaches to understanding sports, right? One of them is thinking about it as this text and the overlap, right? One is a dramaturgical model, thinking about sport as an example of deep play. So how do we understand the significance? Well, it's telling a story about society. That's a dramaturgical model. Second one is thinking about the space it occupies, both geographic and cultural. When you're thinking about COVID, why it's significant how sports handle COVID, It's doing both, right? To understand it, you have to think about the dramaturgical model and the sports space that it occupies. Why does it matter how Sports League handled COVID? Because it tells a story to society. How much should we care about this thing? Arguably, people paid more attention to COVID after the NBA shut down versus when you have head government officials telling us we should pay attention to this thing, right? It became real once the NBA shut down. And then we often look to our sports leagues about how we should handle this thing moving forward. It told a story about society, both reflected society, but guided society. So that's the dramaturgical model. The other thing we could say is, well, it makes sense that some of the leagues handled it in different ways because they occupy not just different geographic spaces, but also different cultural spaces. MMA fans skew more conservative on average than NBA fans. So perhaps it isn't surprising that the two leagues took different responses, right? So by understanding that cultural space, it can give us some insight. So keep this in mind as we move forward next week when you're working on the debates, have that information. The other thing that I'll say is I haven't had a chance to read all of your in-class writings, your responses to this. The first, I think I read about half of them. They're really good. So people are giving good detail, which I appreciated, and people are answering the questions pretty thoroughly. So good job so far for the people who have turned this in. All right, now let's get into really thinking about this idea of the sacred divide. This is the third, I'd say the three things that we've learned so far that are really useful leading into the debate: dramaturgical model, sports space, sacred divide. So sports are always political in the sense that a sociologist generally uses the term. Often when sociologists talk about politics and sports, they talk about the cultural politics of sports. And what I mean is not politics in the traditional sense, but more in terms of what it represents about society and just basic things like access. So for example, on the left, we have a picture of the 1967 Boston Marathon. So you see KV Switzer, she's running with number 261. And this was a time when women were not allowed to run in races beyond 1.5 miles, which is pretty absurd when we think about it. We're talking about marathons, 26 miles. Women weren't allowed to run in public races that were over 1.5 miles long. It was thought that it simply wouldn't be a safe thing to do for a woman's body. So Switzer has her coach register for the race, and you're supposed to have a pre-race medical examination, and she just has her coach turn in a health certificate. So she's running the race, and 2 miles into the race, officials realize that Switzer's a woman. She's 20 years old. She's from Syracuse University, and I believe she was on the cross-country team. So the race director and Will Cloney and the official Jack Semple, who you see, are literally trying to grab her and remove her from the race. They're trying to rip her number off and make it so she can't officially compete and get her off the course. Her teammates help her continue on. They kind of block the people trying to get her off the course, and she eventually finishes the race. She runs it in 4 hours. A year later, Roberta Gibbs does basically the same thing. She's forced to step off the course just before the finish line when she would have run it in 3 hours and 20 minutes, which is a really impressive time, or a solid time. These photos appear in the national paper, and it brings issues to women's long distance running, the possibility that women can compete. Clearly, they're able to finish the race, but men are literally trying to stop her. So this would be an example of how sociologists would say, well, this is political. Or we have something like Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens competed in 1936 Summer Olympics. He wins 4 gold medals, one of the most successful athletes ever at the games. He competes for the United States. He competes as a Black man and wasn't invited to the White House after because of segregation. Both of these are political things. We've talked about these type of examples, the ways that sports are always political. We could think about the battle over Native American teams' mascots. We could think about something like this, international politics. Next class, we'll talk about sports washing. This stadium in front of you was built for the Olympic Games. Anyone know where this is? It's called the Bird Nest Stadium. You can see it's literally built into model of bird's nest, kind of this beautiful architecture. Cost $480 million to build and about $15 million a year just to upkeep it. Does anyone know where this is? Someone take a guess. It was for the Summer Olympics in the last, this was in 2012 or 8. No, I can't remember which one.
London?
Nope, good guess.
China?
China. Yep. This is the Beijing Olympics. Why does a company pay this much to build this type of thing, right? Why would you spend 500 million, $500 million to build this stadium? And then what we see around the world is after the Olympics come and go, because it costs a lot to maintain this, the stadiums fall into disrepair. So next class, we'll talk about why countries continue to do this type of thing. We also see countries use stadiums as a form of diplomacy. For example, this is a stadium built by China, through Chinese money, but it's in Costa Rica, right? It's not in China, it's in Costa Rica. So why would the Chinese government build a stadium in Costa Rica? We'll talk about that next class as well. But when you say politics, when we say politics, generally just common language, what is it that you think of? When people say politics, what's the type of stuff that immediately comes to mind?
Like political parties.
Yeah, political parties are people, right? You think of people running for governor or running for Senate or running for president. That's what we think of. So let's think directly about how that relates to sports, because it's not as obvious. This stuff is clearly political, and we'll talk about why countries do this type of thing. And we're going to talk about all these debates over things like native mascots, about who gets to participate in sport. But when we think about politics, we often think of Democrat versus Republican, or we think about political decisions that politicians are making. Now, we like to imagine, and I started off the very first day of class thinking about this, we like to imagine the idea that sports and politics are kept separate. So this is what scholars, especially I've put this term forth along with Doug Hartman and Alex Manning, society likes to hold on to this idea that there's a sacred divide between politics and sports, meaning they are not supposed to mix with each other. And oftentimes when people see the two mixing, it's thought of in a very dirty way, right? And we could even think language often tells us a lot about our cultural understanding of things. When an athlete is criticized, or when an athlete criticizes a decision to not play them, for instance, and they say, oh, I didn't get a lot of playing time, it was political. Or why did that person, you might hear this in something like MMA or boxing, why did that person get a title shot and not me? Oh, it's just politics. They're saying it in a negative way, right? An athlete never says that in a positive way. A fan never says that in a positive way. If we're saying that sports are political, it means usually that they're dirtied, that decisions are being made not just on the quality of the athlete, but for some other sort of reason, right? So it's thought of as negative when politics enters sports, right? We see that over and over with the language. When we say that a politician is approaching politics like a sport or like a game, what does that mean? What do you think? What would, if someone says that, because that's sometimes politicians are critiqued for treating it like a sport, what would that mean? What do you think? How would you interpret that? If I said, oh, that politician is just treating it like they're treating the decisions like a sport or a game.
And there's like a winner and a loser.
Yeah, and why are they making their decisions? There's a winner and loser, and if we say a politician is just treating politics as a sport, why would that be bad? Why are they saying the things they do, acting the way they do?
It would be because they care more about winning than they do about doing what's right.
Exactly. Yeah. We say, so we treat it dirty both ways. We say if politics enter sports, it's not about who's actually good. It's because some other sort of reason we see politics as dirty. And then when we say sports enter politics and a politician's acting treating it like a sport, we mean they don't really care about the issues. They're simply doing it to win. So we like to imagine they're separate. We hold this in our mind. Yet we see examples over and over of politicians clearly being involved in sport. This was a UFC event, Madison Square Garden. Who's sitting in the front row? Or I guess second row. Who do we see right in the middle? Donald Trump. He's been involved in sports in a number of different ways throughout his life. He's been an owner of casinos throughout the country. He hosted many boxing events. He helped the UFC when it seemed like they were going to crumble in their early years. So he's always been very involved in combat sports. He was also one of the owners of the USFL, the United States Football League. I believe he owned the team in New Jersey, which was the only football league to ever challenge the NFL. There's actually a really good documentary on Trump's connections and time in the USFL and how the USFL crumbled. He tried to buy the Patriots in 1988. He wasn't able to. That's why he went over to the USFL. He tried to buy the Bills in 2014, and the NFL owners rejected him because they get to choose who the owners will be. And they said back in 2014, before he ran for president, they said, we don't want you to be part of the NFL. At one point, he sued the NFL and lost. So he's had this tension with the NFL. He's been very involved in combat sports. He's been involved in football, but always had a tension with the NFL. Next time, we'll reflect on this a little bit more when we think about Trump's relationship between sports and politics during his time as president. We can also see when people are on the campaign trail, right? Here's Trump at a basketball game, again, appearing at these events. And we can think about why that happens. We can think about before Trump, we had Obama. Obama was involved in sports in many different ways. Sometimes people call him the sporting president. He filled out March Madness brackets every year. He appeared on podcasts, sometimes popular podcasts associated with sports, like the Bill Simmons podcast. He would have pickup games outside the White House with other officials. And there were a lot of videos and pictures of him playing basketball. Before that, we have George Bush. He literally owned a baseball team. He had to sell it before he became president. I think before he ran for president, he owned the Texas Rangers. Again, connection between the sports. Clearly, politicians having these connections to sports. Before that, we have Bill Clinton, known as a super fan of the Arkansas Razorbacks, would appear at almost all their games. They gave him a jersey, right, with his name on it to symbolize his fandom. You could do this with every single president. We could jump further back. Anyone recognize this president?
Nixon.
Nixon.
Yep, this is Richard Nixon. Huge fan of football. He actually sent in a play to the coach of the Washington, they were known as the Redskins at the time. He sent in a play that they supposedly ran. So he gave advice on having like the tight end do something. But big fan of football, would often do photo shoots with kids at the White House, which every president does, but would always be seen throwing a football around with them, right? So this is one of his ways they connected to sports. Going further back, we have this cartoon depiction of Teddy Roosevelt. We talked about before, he saved college football. It started in the Ivy Leagues. People were dying. It was a PR disaster. He gathered a meeting of the big Ivy League colleges, and he helped come up with the rule changes because he wanted to preserve the game because he thought it was so valuable. He would have boxing matches and wrestling matches on the White House lawn that he would sometimes participate in. And this is well documented. Or we just see politicians on the campaign trail over and over. Hillary Clinton running against Donald Trump puts this out on her social media. Right? This is the moment when she sees that the Cubs make it to the World Series. Intentionally, the PR team puts this photo out. Then the questions become, was this staged? Was it authentic? Was this a real reaction? Right? We can think about why people ask those questions. Or this is in 1960. This was 7 years before that marathon photo. This was 1960. That means women were still not allowed to participate in races beyond a mile and a half long. Does anyone recognize this receiver from 1960 who helped lead his team? This was a high school team, this was a senior year of high school, and he helped lead them to an undefeated season. Anyone want to guess who this is? Famous politician. It's a politician. The hint is it's a politician that every single one of you know his name.
Joe Biden.
Yep, this is Joe Biden in 1960, which is also a reminder that a lot of the people who run for president are very, very old. Right? This is 1960. He's leading his team to an undefeated season as wide receiver. But even more recently, we see things like this, right? The politicians do photo shoots with athletes. The athletes appear at the White House. So even while we're trying to say there's a sacred divide, again, there's reminders over and over. Okay, there's this divide, but then why are politicians appearing at all these sporting events? Maybe they're just fans, but there seems to be there's something more to it. Why are we making sure that those images get out in the public? What are the politicians actually doing? So what I argue, along with Doug Hartman, is politicians get three things from this most directly, right? And this is what the short reading that I had you do for today was. I'll go over this really quickly, but you can look at the reading again if you're confused. These concepts are really straightforward, right? It's one of these cases where the evidence is right in front of us. And it's just kind of trying to break down the patterns and think why sport is such an important place for this to happen. Why is it that sport is where this occurs more than music, more than movies, more than other cultural forms? It seems like sport is the best place for this. So what is it that politicians get? Well, they get three things. The first is simply visibility. Really obvious. Just a chance to gain publicity and visibility on a safe stage. You go and throw the first pitch and you have a ton of people see you, right? You have the people who are in the audience at the event, but you also have all the people watching around the world. Just a time to be seen. If you're campaigning, what do you need? You need people to recognize your name. You need people to recognize your face. Best place to do that is arguably sports. Very few stages that rival it. I actually can't even think of a public stage that you have so many people just see you. If you go to a concert, it's going to be more of a niche audience. It's not going to get that same type of attention. So the first thing a politician gets is they simply get visibility. When Donald Trump appears at the UFC event, UFC fans see him when the camera pans over to him watching the event. When Obama fills out the bracket, where is he filling this out? What channel do you think this is appearing on? What's the channel we associate most with something like filling out the March Madness bracket?
ESPN.
Appears on ESPN, right? So he appears, it means all those people who are watching it who probably would not tune in if he gives a State of the Union address. Probably are not reading all the articles in the newspaper about what Obama is doing or not doing, but they see his face there. There's a reminder of here's this politician that we know about. Second thing you get, and this is more important, each of these get progressively more important, is connection. It shows you can connect with the populace and be a normal person. There's this classic thing that the person that people vote for, they're more likely, especially in the United States, not sure everywhere, but especially in the United States, there's this classic expression that we vote for the person that we would think we could drink a beer with. This is how people explained when George Bush beat Al Gore the first time Bush became president. He was two-term president. When he beat Al Gore, a lot of people said, well, it was because he was the guy they could drink a beer with, which was kind of funny because George Bush didn't drink at that point, so he was sober. But what that means, what does it mean when you say he's a person you can drink a beer with? If we say a politician is the person we'd like to drink a beer with, what's it saying?
You could like talk to them.
Yeah, you can talk to them. And not only can you talk to them, what's the significance of you're drinking a beer? It's not saying you could get a fancy cocktail or wine with them. What's that beer symbolize?
You can
They're
relate to them in a
relatable.
way, so they're not like they're not holding themselves to a prestigious level. They can like come down to the level that you associate yourself with.
Yeah, that was good. And then who was the other person jumping in? I think both of you were giving a similar answer, right?
Yeah, I don't know who else was talking.
I was gonna say the same thing. Like it's someone that you can share like a personal connection with that doesn't try to like level you in a way like, oh, I'm better than you because I'm running for president.
Yeah,
So, like-
they're not disconnected from what normal people do, right? Like you're both giving really good answers. So what's more powerful, perhaps what's a way to show that you're that normal person, that you connect with the populace? You go and cheer for a sports team, right? We see sports as this unifying thing in the United States that the commoner can enjoy. It's not something from elite society. It's not something disassociate with poorer people. It's that thing that goes across class divides, right? So instead of drinking a beer, you appear at that sporting event and you have a lot of people see you, and you might even be drinking a beer or doing something like that there, but you look like an ordinary person. You're cheering for the team just like everyone else. Clinton appears and he gets excited at the right moments. You can see him getting happy or sad the same everyone else is. And so you say, that seems like a person I can connect to. Now, this is also something you can fail at, right? Mitt Romney, do people remember? I don't know. Now we're starting to get a little bit further away. Mitt Romney was a person who ran against Obama for the second term. Now, Romney failed at this in a few occasions, and this is one of the challenges he faced, was connecting to ordinary people. So there was a famous interview where Romney appeared at a NASCAR event, and so they go up to him with the microphone and they ask him to talk a little bit about being there. And what he says is, oh, I love NASCAR, and again, thinking about NASCAR as a space in terms of a cultural space, more popular in the South, one of the most popular sports in the United States. And it's interesting, when we were listing popular sports in the United States, no one listed NASCAR. If we were in the South, you'd get a lot more people listing NASCAR, skews more conservative in terms of fans, skews a little bit more rural when we get to the Northeast or Western United States. It's a little bit more of a rural popularity, incredibly popular sport, ton of money in NASCAR. So he's at the event, a lot of eyes on him. So he has a chance to make a connection with ordinary people. And the question is, well, why are you here? And he says, I have a lot of friends who are NASCAR owners, right? So that's his failure. This is a chance to connect and seem like a normal person. But instead of talking about the event, instead of being Obama playing basketball, where's that picture? Playing basketball or having knowledge of the teams like an ordinary fan, instead of saying, oh, I like these players, he said, or racers, he says, oh, I'm fans with the owners. So he sets himself apart. The other thing that comes out at the same time is the sport that Romney's team is involved in. Does anyone remember this? He actually, I think his daughter competes in this, or maybe his family members compete in this. Does anyone know the sport that Romney is most closely linked with? It's related to a four-legged animal. It's a sport that happens in the Olympics, and it's associated usually with wealth.
Is it horse racing?
It's not horse racing. What was the other? What was the What was the answer? The other person said?
Equestrian.
Yeah, and what's equestrian?
It's like horses like doing obstacle course.
All right, so let's get even more specific. So he is involved in that, but there's a more specific type of horse activity that people compete in. That's even more traditional than horses having to go over the jumps and stuff.
Polo.
Nope. Does anyone know dressage? Anyone know what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Brooke, what is dressage?
It's like fancy so you show like how well your horse behaves and how well you can control your horse.
Yeah, you basically make the horse dance, right? Like you do, the horse kind of dances and takes steps that are cool looking and follows your lead. So that was a sport so sport is his path to connect with the populace, to be a normal person. Problem is that Romney, and in both cases, there's a lot of attention given to this. Friends with the NASCAR owners is a justification for watching the sport that a common person would enjoy. And then what's the sport he's associated with? Dressage, where you have horses kind of performing. Okay, so we see visibility, first thing. Second is about connecting with the masses. Third, and this is the more subtle and difficult one, is you pick up some of the qualities associated with the sport, right? So osmosis is normally a term that you hear in biology. It means when you have a high density of something, it generally diffuses into the area next to it where there's a lower density. You pick up the quality by being next to it, right? So you pick up some of those qualities that we associate with sport, whether it's about being a fun person, an energetic person, community, likability, or even more, you're someone who celebrates hard work. You're someone who celebrates excellence. When Clinton appears at the event, he seems like a normal person, but that excitement of the event, the emotions, all those things kind of rub off on him, and he gets those qualities. When Nixon likes football, we think, okay, it's not just that he's getting the visibility. Nixon was someone who had trouble connecting with the populace. Very intelligent person, very dry, right? He's the Republican who runs for president, fails against JFK, and then wins next time before being impeached for scandal. But he always had trouble connecting with the people. Football was one of the few places where he looked like he could have fun, that he could talk to children, that people would like him, right? He gets those qualities. For Roosevelt, what was the quality that he got through sport? It was this idea of being masculine, this idea of being very tough and hardworking. So you get those qualities. Now, it doesn't work, and this is what we always ask over and over, is the key thing for this to happen is that the sacred divide has to remain. That's the only time it works for a politician. It's at its most powerful as a political tool when people are least aware of it. When people believe that nothing important or unusual is going on. In other words, when the politics is kind of hidden or masked, when we see it as natural or organic. That means a politician has to engage in this kind of delicate dance, I guess like the Romney's horses, because even as they use sport for a political purpose, sport has to still keep that status as not being political, as being the sacred place, right? If the president, if the politician is appearing at this sporting event and it seems just like a photo shoot, right? This is a lot of the criticism that Hillary Clinton got. People are saying, oh, were you really a fan of this team? Was it just a photo shoot? We also have to ask what politicians get critiqued for it and what politicians don't, right? This is one of those spaces that it's harder for a woman who's a politician to enter, right? Sometimes people don't believe that she's a true fan. Is that because of her history or is it because of her gender identity? You have to appear natural. People made fun of the way that Trump looked when he held a basketball. Other people then had a backlash to people making fun of him for it. So when do we believe it's actually authentic? So the politician has to ensure that it's still seen as just being a normal thing, that they just like the sport. But once they bring politics into it, that sacred divide is broken down. We'll return to this again next class when we think about Trump's relationship to sports, because he had a relationship to sport unlike any previous president before him, and arguably different than any president after him, because Joe Biden kind of tried to return that sacred divide. Okay, so we have 7 minutes left. So what I want to do with 7 minutes is the in-class writing that is due today is I all had you look for an example of the connection, an example of a politician using sports. So thinking about those 3 terms that I laid out, what I want you to do, and this is already on Brightspace, so I'm going to see if you have any questions and then we can just end class, is I want to give you time to tell me what example you chose. You could just paste the link or you could write a little summary of it. And then you're just going to think about what was the politician actually doing with the sport and what were they getting from it, right? Was it just visibility? Were they achieving this connection to people? Did they actually pick up some of the qualities? The different sports they go to, the different ways they use the sport, it's all going to do different things. So I just want you to reflect a little bit on the example. And then again, thinking about the COVID in-class writing that you did, thinking about this in-class writing, both of these are going to be really useful for the debate as we work on it next week. Does anyone have questions about that? You can raise your hand if you want me to call you. Okay, so I would say you have time to work on your in-class writing. We can end it there. I will email you out the podcast that you have to listen for next time, and also the short other little assignment that goes along with it. We will be meeting on Zoom again on Friday. I will send out, in the past, I think it's changed with Brightspace. In the past, the link was the same every time for Zoom. It may be changing, and that's why it didn't work when you tried to click and I had to send a new one. So I will send out the link before class and double check if I can just have a permanent one. If you have any questions at all, email me and I'll get back to you. But that's the plan. So feel free to raise your hand. You can always put a question in the chat right now. Question. Actually, I have a quick question for you. Do you want me to share the slides from today? Would that be useful? They're mostly just photos, so I don't know if it would be useful, but if it would be at all helpful, I can. What do you think?
I think as long as the recorded lecture is shared to everyone, it might be good.
Okay, yeah, I'll put up the lecture on YouTube, and then you could just go back to the lecture if there's any like definitional thing or any confusion. Does that sound good? I'll take silence as an excited yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, so you know the in-class writing, get that in. You know what you're doing Friday. Everyone enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you on Zoom on Friday, and then we'll be back in class on Monday. So, and also make sure you're there on Monday and Wednesday because you're working with your groups. If you're sick or something, let me know, but also let your groups know. So that's the plan. I will see you all in 2 days. All right,
Kyle.
bye everyone.
Bye, feel better.
Yeah, thank you.
Kyle,
Yeah.
I submitted it by accident. Can you like unsubmit it for me so I can redo it?
No, but you
Like
can
a-
just email me. Email me your answer, and then I'll just use what you email me as the actual thing.
Okay.
That's easier. I don't Brightspace. I don't know how to, I don't know how to unsubmit things on Brightspace yet. So
Okay.
cool. Anyone else have any questions at all?
I have a question.
What's up?
So for my in-class for the COVID and sport,
Yeah.
I don't know if I misunderstood it, but I did mine for like high school sports. Is
Oh no,
that
that's
okay?
perfect. Yeah, that's really
Okay.
good. Yeah,
All right.
any sport, any level. Yeah,
Okay, all right, thank you.
cool.
Bye.
Wait, Professor, I had a question too.
Yeah.
Was there another in-class training besides the COVID sport one too? We're supposed to do? Am I missing one?
No, so the COVID and sport one you already did, and then today
That was the
there's
one
a
I
new,
did
and then
today.
there's a new one from today. What we were just talking about.
Oh, okay, okay, all right,
Yeah. So if you do
Alright.
both of those, you're good.
okay, all right, thanks. All right,
Cool.
take care. Feel better.
All right, I'll see you. You have any question, Isaiah, or you just didn't turn it off yet? All right, cool. I'm gonna end it then.